Welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum for this, our annual service of remembrance. My name is Dave Pridham, and I have the honor to act as your Master of Ceremonies today, along with our chaplain, Reverend Douglas Mitchell, who will lead us in the formal service of remembrance. I'd like to take this moment as we start to thank Bill McBride. Bill served as our Master of Ceremonies for the past 11 years, ladies and gentlemen, and he is still helping today. He's over to your left, talking with CHCH TV for their live broadcast of this special day. Bill has done so much to help the museum over the years, and he's very kindly shared his insights and experience to help me prepare for this role. So on behalf of all of us, Bill, I'd like to say thank you. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us here. This is the largest indoor remembrance service in Canada, and I think it gets bigger every year thanks to all of you. We're very fortunate and proud to have so many of you with us today. The First World War ended 100 years ago today. At the time, people hoped that they had seen the end of war. Of course, we know now it actually marked the beginning of a particularly violent century. Throughout World War II, Korea, and many UN and NATO peacekeeping or other missions since then, we have been fortunate to live in Canada. And we come here today to remember, mourn, and honor those women and men who gave their lives on our behalf. We also think about those men and women for whom the battles continue, even if they don't wear a uniform anymore. By doing so, we show our thanks for those who served our country and those who continue to serve our country today. And we're grateful to have so many veterans and serving members of our Canadian forces and emergency services with us today. As our President and CEO, Dave Rohrer, likes to say, every day is Remembrance Day at Canadian Warplane Heritage, but there is only one November the 11th. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please stand as you are able for the marching on of the colors. I'll ask you to remain standing afterwards and join in the singing of our national anthem. Color Party, march on the colors. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Chris Freeman, Chairman of the Board of Directors at Canadian Warplane Heritage, to bring words of welcome and greeting.
Good morning and welcome. 100 years ago today, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, along the entire 440-mile western front from Channel to the Swiss border, there was a new sound, the sound of silence, as the guns stopped firing. Silence when the guns stopped firing was not unusual along the battlefront during the Great War, but previously that silence had been purely momentary when an artillery barrage ended, to be followed by whistles blowing that called the troops into action, going over the top. Thus, silence for the troops had been merely a prelude before the horror of trench warfare continued. The silence on November the 11th, 1918 was something new. It was a silence that shouted out the prospect and promise of peace and a new beginning for the world after 4 years of carnage on a scale never before seen. That silence also marked the opportunity for remembrance and recognition of those who had fallen in what at the time was fervently described as the war to end all wars. Sadly, other conflicts have engulfed our nation and the world since that time. During the Great War, from August 1914 to November 1918, more than 650,000 Canadians, more than 8% of the entire population of Canada at the time, served in the armed forces, on land, at sea and in the air, principally in the European theatre. More than 68,000 of them gave their lives in that conflict. During the Second World War, over 1 million Canadians, again, more than 8% of the entire population of Canada at the time, served in the armed forces, on land, at sea and in the air, in theatres of war all over the world. More than 47,000 of them gave their lives in that conflict. Other conflicts and peacekeeping operations in the intervening years since 1945 in Korea, Cyprus, the Balkans, the Sinai, Afghanistan, and elsewhere across the globe have added the names of approximately 1,000 more Canadians to the roll of honour, soldiers, sailors and airmen who have given their lives in the service of their country. Behind those serving in the armed forces during times of conflict were millions more who served their country in its time of need, in particular in the merchant marine, where their lives were every bit as much at risk as if they had been in the front line, and those who worked in the factories and in the fields, providing the material, logistical support and food needed not only to support and feed the armed forces, but also to help feed the general population of the United Kingdom, where the home front had become the new front line. Those who served in the armed forces were motivated principally by a sense of duty. They were ordinary people who on so many occasions did extraordinary things, all of whom we remember today in 2 minutes of silence at 11 o'clock. At Canadian Warplane Heritage, we are particularly privileged to be associated with so many people who have been closely involved in the protection and maintenance of our freedoms. Over the past 46 years, Canadian Warplane heritage has been able to both share and help strengthen the bond between Canada and its allies that was first built during the years of European conflict and still remains so strong today, as we honour in particular the memory of 10,695 Canadians who served with Bomber Command between 1939 and 1945 and who did not return home. The Great War was perhaps the first war that, when it ended, was marked by the raising of monuments by nations and by local communities to commemorate and honour the ordinary soldiers, sailors and airmen who had taken part in the conflict, and in particular the unknown soldier. Almost every village, town and city in Britain and throughout the Commonwealth raised its own war memorial to those from its community who did not come back. The words, "they did their duty," often feature on those memorials, along with the names of the lost. In our modern world, every day we are made aware that the man and woman in uniform is always on duty and at risk wherever they may be. They are on duty for all of us. We often take for granted our current way of life, our freedom to participate in cultural and political events, and our right to live under a government of our choice. The Canadians who went off to war in distant lands truly believed that without freedom there can be no enduring peace, and without peace there can be no enduring freedom. It is thanks to the service and sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform that we can today enjoy the freedoms that would otherwise have been taken from us by unfettered or blind totalitarianism. Canada is geographically distanced from the fields of combat. In the conflicts between 1914 and 1918, and 1939 to 1945, the bodies of the fallen did not come home, as our fallen heroes are brought back today. The inscription on the Veterans Memorial at the Point Pelee National Park overlooking Lake Erie reminds us what we owe to those young men and women who did their duty and who made the ultimate sacrifice so far from their home and families. It reads as follows: "They will never know the beauty of this place, see the seasons change, enjoy nature's chorus. All we enjoy, we owe to them, men and women who lie buried in the earth of foreign lands and in the seven seas." Also the words of John Maxwell Edmonds, written originally as an epitaph for the Great War, bear tribute to those whose duty took them so far from home and who never returned. "When you go home, tell them of us and say, for their tomorrow, we gave our today." While in 2 minutes of silence at 11 o'clock, we remember and honour those who made the ultimate sacrifice, we also honour all those who served and returned, and who, by their example and their courage, have passed on to succeeding generations a better knowledge and understanding of the word duty. Today, it is our duty and our privilege to remember and honour them, as well as to honour all those men and women who are currently serving our nation. We will remember them.
We now come to the formal part of our remembering as we acknowledge the lives of those who fought and died and were wounded in all the battles that have been fought. And I invite you now to bow your heads in prayer. We gather on this Remembrance Day Sunday, O God, to remember those who have served and are serving in our armed forces. This is a special day of remembrance, as we acknowledge that it has been 100 years since the end of the First World War, that was to be the war to end all wars. Yet there have been many wars that have happened since then. World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and the Iraq War, as well as many peacekeeping missions that have involved various branches of the Canadian Armed Forces. All of these actions have involved casualties that have claimed life and limb of those who have been called to serve, whether regular or reserve forces. We are called to remember their sacrifices and those of their families, and to share these with our children to remind them of the cost of freedom. We remember Corporal Nathan Cirillo of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, who was killed while on duty at the National War Memorial. Also Warrant Officer Patrice Vissant, who was accompanying another member of the Canadian Armed Forces who wanted to visit a Veterans Affairs Service Center and was run down by a terrorist. All these lives lost and numerous lives changed by war, and we are no closer to the peace that we seek, because humankind is a killer. So we ask you, O God, to remind us that we must strive more as we seek to bring peace to this world of yours and ours. Help us to remember the principles that the veterans fought and died for, to be vigilant when we see others trying to usurp our freedoms by language and actions. Remain with us as we leave this service today and go forth into the world to continue to tell the story of sacrifice that our veterans made and continue to make for our children and grandchildren. Amen. For the scripture passage this morning, I chose Psalm 46, which comes from the Hebrew scriptures. Oftentimes the Hebrews would be able to tell their emotions in prayer to God. They weren't limited. They would show all kinds of emotions: anger, hatred, peace, love. And so we need to remember that we can voice our emotions to God, who comes to bring us strength. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters so that its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fail. He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He said, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. May these words remind us of the presence of God with us in each and every day of our lives, and may the words inspire us to seek the good of all humankind. Amen.
It's almost that time. In about 1 minute, we will pause and remember. Those of us who know someone in our personal lives who gave their life for Canada, it's usually what we think of. I know that's where I start. And by the end of the 2 minutes, I always find myself thinking about the brothers and sisters that came back, or the veterans who are with us today. I think especially of those who came back broken and who need our help. I'd like to think that after today, we can go forward and make every day our own personal Remembrance Day and give our veterans the support they need. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I would ask that you all stand as you are able for the playing of the last post.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not worry them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Please be seated. We are blessed at this time to once again have the Redeemer University College Concert Choir with us. They're going to share in Flanders Field.
And gentlemen, there we go. I have the pleasure to introduce some special guests before we continue with our program today. I'd like to start with the commanding officer of 424 City of Hamilton Squadron, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Marcus, and his Chief Warrant Officer, Scott Longland. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. And City of Hamilton Squadron, it's our squadron, ladies and gentlemen, the Tigers. Let's have a round of applause. I'd like to say a word about Florence King. Florence King is 102 years old, ladies and gentlemen. She served as a surgical nurse with Pacific Air Command in World War II, and I'm happy to say she's here with us right now. Florence, if you're able, could you stand up, or one of your family members? Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Since we're on the topic, let me tell you about Jack Finan. Jack Finan comes from Hamilton, Ontario. He just happens to be the oldest living Lancaster pilot with us today. Jack, if you or one of your family members can stand up. Now, for the other veterans with us, I'm sorry I haven't got time to introduce every one of you individually, but we will get to you later in our program, I promise. Now, our local MP, Mr. David Sweet, the MP for Flamborough-Glanbrook, is with us today, but he's very kindly yielded his spot to Mr. Andrew Scheer, leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. Mr. Scheer, I'd invite you up now to bring words of greeting.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor for me to be able to participate in this year's Remembrance Day Ceremony with you. And I want to thank my colleague, David Sweet, for allowing me to bring greetings on behalf of the Parliament of Canada and Her Majesty's Opposition. I'm so glad to be here as we remember the sacrifices made for Canada by all those men and women who have served and who continue to serve. The service and sacrifices of Canadian Armed Forces members during times of war, conflict, and in times of peace have helped define and shape us as a nation. Throughout our history, Canadian men and women have bravely fought against tyranny and evil around the world, defending our country or defending these values when they are under attack for others. This year's ceremonies held across Canada, of course, will take on a very special meaning. Canadians will not only be marking the bravery of our men and women in uniform, but also the 100th anniversary of the armistice of November 11th, 1918. The horrors of the First World War left millions dead and injured. More than 650,000 men and women from Canada and Newfoundland served during the First World War. More than 66,000 gave their lives, and over 172,000 were wounded. Later on today, I'll be visiting the John Foote Armory to pay my tribute to the veterans and express my gratitude for standing on guard for Canada. And there is no greater sacrifice that one can give than that which our brave men and women have given and continue to give, in putting themselves at risk so that we can live in peace and security. And there is no way for us to truly, adequately thank that service. And that is why today and every day, we should remember what they did for us. Anytime we do something that others around the world can't, vote in an election, attend a church of our denomination, do the types of things that those who laid down their lives did so to preserve and to protect and pass on to us, we should and we will remember them. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Next, I'd like to call on our MPP, Donna Skelly, the member for Flamborough-Glanbrook, to bring her welcoming remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Pridham, Mr. Freeman, Reverend Mitchell, thank you for organizing today's service. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Flamborough Councillor Brenda Johnson, Kathy Buckering, President and CEO of the John C. Munro Hamilton International Airport, David Sweet, our Member of Parliament, and of course the Honorable Andrew Scheer, Leader of the Official Opposition. And welcome all of our distinguished guests here today, including and especially our veterans. It is my privilege to be with you this morning, and I bring greetings on behalf of the Government of Ontario. Every year on November 11th, across our nation, people gather at ceremonies like this one and take time to recognize the service and the sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform. Here at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, that recognition is even more striking as we stand encompassed by the remnants of past wars and conflicts where Canadians prove themselves again and again as formidable defenders of the values we cherished then and cherish today. From Passchendaele to Juno Beach, from the Battle of Kapyong in Korea to Operation Medusa in Kandahar, our soldiers have served and continue to serve with courage and distinction. As I look out and see the faces of those who wear our country's uniform, I am reminded what Canada stands for, why our values of freedom, human rights, and democracy are so important, and why they are so worth fighting for. Tyranny doesn't sleep. Those who seek to oppress and enslave others don't give up. And in the words of the philosopher George Santayana, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The souls who gave their lives fighting to protect our country demand of us that we remember, that we continue to stand guard, and that we honor their memories by being vigilant. We owe them that and so much more. We stand here in the greatest country on earth, and today of all days, the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, we honor those who gave their lives to give us freedom. God bless and watch over all of our Canadian service members, past and present, and all of you here today. We will hold that torch high, and we will never break faith. Thank you.
Thank you, MPP Skelly. Next, I invite Brenda Johnson, City Councillor for Ward 11, to say a few words.
How awesome is this? Way to go. Thank you so much for coming today. But I have to thank the volunteers at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum for organizing this, setting up the chairs, cleaning up. Every year. And they do an amazing job, and they do it better every year. I don't know how that's possible. And I say this every year, don't wait until November the 11th to come and visit the Warplane. I can guarantee you, if you come every single day, you will thoroughly enjoy yourselves and you will learn something new every single day. As always, I brought a date with me today. Retired employee of Westinghouse, Jerry McNair, Jerry. In World War II, Jerry served under the Canadian Navy as stoker first class, and he served on the Royal Navy ship, the HMS Puncher. He traveled from Vancouver to Panama Canal, to North Africa, to Scotland. And I forgot, Jerry told me not to mention his name, And he also told me not to tell you that he's going to be 95 soon. Thank you so much for your service, Mr. McLean. I'd like to take you back over 100 years ago. At the start of the First World War, my great-grandfather, Robert Neville, walked into the armories down on James Street North and enlisted. A short time later, his wife and 2 small children waved goodbye to him at the Hamilton train station. Little did they know that it was the last time they were going to see him alive. Robert was killed by a sniper at Eames and was buried at Vimy. And he's one of over 2,000 Hamiltonians who lost their lives in World War I. My family is very proud of our brave ancestor, Robert, but there are 2 heroes in this story. The second hero is my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother, like all families, sent their loved ones off when they enlist, keep the home fires burning when they are away, and they welcome them home, especially when they're battered and bruised. But for some who paid the ultimate price and did not return, the families are left to grieve, to pick up the pieces when the dust settles. As we honor those who served and are serving, and we read the names of those heroes who fought and died for us, I ask that you also remember and give thanks to the unsung heroes, the families, the grandparents, the parents, the spouses, and the children, for it is important for us to remember that they too paid a price. So on behalf of the City of Hamilton, Ward 11, Mount Hope, I would like to thank you for coming today and taking part in this wonderful service to recognize those in uniform, as well as their families, for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Lastly, I'd like to invite Kathy Puckering, President and CEO of John C. Munro Hamilton International Airport, to say some words.
Good morning. Dignitaries, members of the Canadian Forces, past and present, veterans, families, friends, and guests. I'm honored to be speaking with you today on such an important occasion, and I thank Mr. Pridmore for inviting me here and the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum for hosting, once again, an amazing activity. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. Today we have gathered to honor our heroes, to remember their achievements, their courage, and their dedication, and to say thank you for their sacrifices. I personally have not sacrificed. I have not given my duty, yet I have my freedom. It was given to me, so I have a duty to remember. Like many others, the commitment that these brave men and women in our military have done on behalf of all of the Canadians, some of you in this room today. Our airport has had a long-standing history, and we remain strong supporters of our military and of the heritage that we have here in Hamilton. Originally built in 1940, it was a facility of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan in Canada. The program trained Allied air crews during World War II, and it was administered by the Canadian government and commanded by the Royal Canadian Air Force. Our airport, as a wartime Air Force training station, was designed as a multi-purpose military field. It was used for flight training, air navigation, and air gunnery until the end of the war. Today, it is important for our airport community to continue with its role in the training and development. We regularly provide our facilities and the opportunity to host vital military exercises. We also collaborate on a regular basis with many initiatives here with the museum. We would like to commend and thank all the volunteers and the management of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum for helping us to remember, to ensure that we have the protection and the maintenance and continued freedoms. Your passion and tireless work to ensure the individuals retain their knowledge and the understanding of our past, to preserve the aircraft in this hangar as a memory of those who have served on our soil and who fought for our freedom, thank you. As we mark the 100th anniversary and the end of World War I, today is so important for us to recognize those that came before us and who made that ultimate sacrifice. On behalf of myself and the entire team at the John C. Munro Hamilton International Airport, I want to thank you, all our veterans, both past and present, for your service and sacrifice to our country. We honor our local heroes who gave their lives so we could be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Ted Barris. You can read his extensive biography in your program today. If you haven't already done so, I highly encourage it. Suffice to say, Ted Barris is a prolific author, and what I like most about his books is that Ted has an ability to speak to veterans and bring their stories to life on the page that few other authors have. He's an excellent historian, a writer, and a great storyteller, and Ted is here today to bring a little of that history to life for us right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ted Barris.
Thanks, Dick. Thank you very much. I think you're all used to my wandering. The trick, I have to make sure that the cameras are ready for my wandering. That picture of the dam busters, that's the Canadian dam busters. They are the survivors. That photograph was taken on the morning of 1943, May 17th, 1943. They had flown all night. They'd come back to RAF Scampton. Here's the actual shot. They've had the most precious meal in all of England, bacon and eggs. Gone to bed, roused out of bed, photographed by the RAF. The British together, the Australians and the New Zealanders together, and the Canadians and one American, Joe McCarthy, second from the right. Now, before I go into the story, with all due respect to Florence, where's Florence, and all the other veterans, I would like anybody in her or his 20s to stand and raise your hand. If you're in your teens or 20s, stand and raise your hands, please. Raise your hands high, high, to symbolize what the veterans did 75 years ago. You all volunteer for something. They did it in the most deadly times on the planet. Thank you very much. What I want you to do now is to remember, every time I talk about an aspect of the dam busters, don't think about the veterans who are frail and balding and teetering. Think about the young men and women who just stood up and held their hands high to say that they're proud to be in their 20s and proud to be Canadians. We go back to a time in 1942-43, which was not good for the Allies. The news was not good. Dunkirk had happened in 1940. The British had brought out 300,000 people, saved them from the beaches, thanks to the little ships. It wasn't a victory. At Dunkirk, it wasn't a victory, it was a retreat. For the Canadians at Dieppe in 1942, our crucible, the 9 bloodiest hours in Canadian military history. A huge setback. We learned a lot, but it cost lives. And the British had put up with the Blitz in industrial and population centers throughout the war, and the Americans came in 1941 because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It was not a good time. enter a man named Barnes Wallis, who was a designer, an aviation designer with Vickers in England. And he recognizes that the real enemy of Nazi Germany is not the men and women of the country or the regime, it's the steel they produce that generates the weaponry, the aircraft, the ships, the bullets. And it's that target that he's focused on as early as 1937. In this little clip from the movie The Dam Busters in 1955, actor Michael Redgrave, as Barnes Wallis, articulates the problem and the potential solution. Listen to this.
The whole of this great arsenal of war factories in the Ruhr depends for its water on 3 enormous dams. The Möhne, the Eder, and the Sorpe. They control the level of the canals and supply a lot of hydroelectric power as well. When those are full, they hold 400 million tons of water. Just think of the chaos if we could break those walls down. Now, this is what I wanted to do. Drop a 10-ton bomb from 40,000 feet that would seal itself in the roots of the wall. Well, the shock waves would be tremendous. A real earthquake.
A 10-ton bomb that didn't exist, from an aircraft 40,000 feet that didn't exist, with the precision to put it next to the damn wall that didn't exist. He was dreaming in Technicolor. But what he realized was he had to shake the dams down. And he comes up with an idea for a weapon to attack these dams that was unique. The Germans, the Nazis, were so cocksure their dams in the Ruhr Valley, which produced this hydroelectricity, which produced the steel, were so safe. The only way they protected them was with torpedo nets. They figured that torpedoes might be the only weapon to attack them with, and so they ran booms. If you see that line right in there, there were booms, and down under the water were torpedo nets. These are the 2 dams that were the targets. Obviously, 2 different images, they're not that close together. So he realizes, Barnes Wallis does, the way to attack these things is to get the weapon, the bomb, over the torpedo nets. And in order to do that, he's got to create a skipping bomb. Now, why skipping? Okay, how many of you have gone to the lake in the summertime? Nice, calm, cool morning, or in the evening, the lake is like glass, and you pick up a big flat stone, and you heave it across the lake, right? Andrew, I bet you know, you figure it's your strong right arm that's delivering the skipping and the speed. It's the spinning of the stone. It's the spin that delivers the propulsion forward. And that's what Barnes Wallis figures is the way to do this. So he comes up with this spherical bomb, the one on the left, and he asks the manufacturers at Vickers, he says, how long would it take to make a prototype of one of these spherical bombs to skip at the dams? And they said, about 2 years. Not good enough. So he comes up with a more conventional drum design. 10,000 pounds, 6,500 pounds of steel, 3,500 pounds of TNT to skip like the stone over the torpedo nets to the dam. Now, how's he going to get it there? He's going to get it there with Lancasters, which are now coming off the line in 42, and they're altered. They take off the mid-upper gun turret back here, and in place inside they put huge calipers to cradle the bomb. But in order for the bomb to skip, it's got to be spinning backwards. I'm not a cricketer, but apparently Barnes Wallis consulted a cricketer who said, if you put backspin on a ball, it propels the ball forward. So they decided, through trial and error, this bomb should be spinning at 500 revolutions per minute in the belly of a Lancaster. So that's what's got to be done as they fly in low to the dam, okay? Here's the physics of it all. I'm not a physics person either, but here's the design. The Lancaster has to be traveling at 235 miles an hour. It's got to be traveling at 60 feet off the water. If it travels at 80 feet off the water and drops the bomb will disintegrate. If they drop the bomb at 40 feet off the water, the plume of the splash might knock the plane down. It's got to be 60 feet. And so they come up with this idea of lights, which are beams crisscrossing beneath the lamp to determine the 60 feet. So it's spinning, it's got to be dropped within 1,000 yards of the dam, it's back spinning, it trips over the torpedo nets, goes to the back of the dam, sinks, and explodes like a device that the Navy uses against the U-boats, like a depth charge. That's the physics of it. Okay, we've got the bomber, we've got the bomb, we've got the physics, now we need the crews. And so Guy Gibson, who's the commander of this mysterious squadron, pulled together 133 men, including 30 Canadians, who volunteered, just like the young people in this room who stood and put their hands in the air in their 20s, to do this. Here's Guy Gibson, actor Richard Todd, in the movie describing what he knows of the raid that's coming and what the men in the squadron will have to do.
Now, I understand that the job, whatever it is, has got to be done at low level. So the first thing is to practice low flying day and night until we can do it with our eyes shut.
Now in these scenes, you're seeing the Lancasters, which were borrowed from the RAF for the movie. The movie was shot in black and white so that some of the real footage of the bouncing bomb could be integrated. RAF Cold War pilots, jet pilots, are flying these Lancasters in the movie. When the first rushes of the film came back to the director, he looked at the 60 foot off the water that the Lancs were flying, and the director said, that's not dramatic enough, even though it's real. So they asked the pilots to go to 40 feet off the water. Well, the RAF pilot says, bring it on. They loved it. So that's what was going on in this extraordinary film. But I paint it as if the low flying is hot dogging. It wasn't. It was training. The men had to learn how to fly at low level without knowing what the target was. They trained for 7.5 weeks between the end of March 1943 and the actual raid, May the 16th, without knowing the target was the Roar River dams. All they're told is, we're going to fly low, night and day, until you can do it blindfolded, Guy Gibson said. He actually said, if I remember, he actually said, I'm going to ask you and be able to help you get to, if I want you to go to a tree in England, that's what he said, you'll be able to do it night or day, low level, blindfolded. That's what he expected of them. And so they start to train. But one of the aircraft goes out and does photography around England of lakes and reservoirs and lowlands so that they can plan out the cross countries that the bombers' training will follow. And out they go, and Ken Brown is among them. And in those 2 months of preparation, collectively they did 2,000 hours of low-level flying. That's a lot of practice without knowing what the heck your target is, but that's what they did. This is a painting, if you can sort of see it, showing one of the bombers going at the dam. Now, the low-level business was also that they could get, we use the phrase all the time, flying under the radar, right? They literally had to fly from Scampton, in the middle of England in Lincolnshire, all the way to the Ruhr Valley, across the North Sea, over Holland, up the estuary of the Scheldt, or across the Zuider Zee, and get to the Ruhr. What's that, about 60 feet to the ceiling? Maybe a little higher than that. A 15-ton Lancaster for 2.5 hours from England to Germany and back at that altitude. That's a strain on the pilot and the crews. But let's go through what everybody on the team is doing. First up is the pilot. He gets to the Ruhr River, to the reservoir, having flown those 2 hours to get the aircraft there, and he draws a bead on the dam, and he's listening to all the men on board tell him all the elevations and the aspects of the attack. The one sitting to his right is the flight engineer. He could pilot the plane if he had to, but he's monitoring the Merlin's throttles. Same way you on your car with your right foot, your accelerator, he's moving the Merlin's throttles back and forth to deliver the 235 miles an hour. So he's reporting this to the pilot. Behind them is the navigator, and he's keeping an eye on the beams, calling to the pilot in the intercom, up, up, down, down, steady, steady. So that information is coming to him with the crisscross of the beams. When the beams come together into a spot, they're 60 feet off the water. The altimeters didn't work. That's why this beam idea comes up. Then below them is the wireless radio operator. He's making sure that the bomb is spinning at 500 revolutions per minute. It's got to be or it won't work. Then we've got in the nose of the aircraft the bomb aimer. And the bomb aimer is lying on his belly, peering out of the perspex at the dam ahead of him using a bomb sight. Hang on, guys. I'll do it right into the camera. Here's what the bomb sight looks like. It's a piece of wood like a Y, and it's got 2 pins on it. When the towers of the dam lined up with the pins, it meant that the aircraft was within 1,000 yards of the dam. And they had to be exact, otherwise it wouldn't work. Now, bear in mind too, we've got 2 gunners. We've got a rear gunner and a front gunner. Why? Because the Nazi gunners are shooting at them. All this is going on, this precision, intricate gathering of knowledge and professionalism in delivering this aircraft and the bomb to the dam, and they're under fire. And guess what? If any one of those elements isn't exactly right, it's a dummy run. They got to go around and do it again because they've only got one bomb per aircraft. One of the men I interviewed, Dave Roger, a rear gunner from, I didn't interview him, I looked at his transcripts, said of the raid, we were 7 men against the Reich. He was a rear gunner. They were alone, they were 2 hours from England, and unless they came together as a team, this wasn't going to work. That's how risky this was. All right, let's talk about one of the crews, a Canadian crew. Would you hold that for me? Thank you. This crew was the one that went out and did all the photography of the landscape around England. 2 men on this crew were from Hamilton. Al Garshowitz, the wireless radio operator, and Frank Garbus, the front gunner. In fact, they knew each other as rugby rivals on the what was it, Eastwood, out in the shoreline where they used to play. We have, I think, members of the Garbus family here today. Right, please stand, Garbus family members, so we can acknowledge you. And they're pals with each other, Al and Frank. Any members of the Garshowitz family here? They might have been. They've been to previous gatherings. Anyway, they were pals. They were also trained as wireless air gunners, and they end up on the dams raid. Now, they're the ones that go out and do the photography. Garshowitz, as well as being a wireless radio operator, loved photography. He was a shutterbug. So not only was he taking shots of the land and the water out the Lancaster for the cross countries that were going to be planned, he took a couple of shots of his pilot. I got a shot of Bill. I got a shot of Floyd Weil, my navigator from Nova Scotia, and we got shots of each other. Oh, and maybe I'll take a shot of a couple of the Lancasters that I see flying beside us. All of those photographs are illegal. This is a secret operation. None of that was supposed to be taken photographs of. And you know how I got them? That's because Al sent them home as snaps to his family, and somehow they evaded the censors, and they are the only photographs in existence of the actual training of the dams raid, because no other photography was taken. There's the reference in Garshowitz's log. March the 29th, Bill Astle, wireless radio operator, low level, 1 hour and 40 minutes, taking the shots. Oh yeah, and I'll take a shot of Bill, and I'll take a shot of that Lancaster, all of which was illegal. Garshowitz was also a bit of a poet. As they were boarding, remember I told you they didn't know until the 16th of May where they were going. They find out on the 16th, they load up the upkeep, they're about to go, it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and Garshowitz takes a piece of chalk, and borrowing from Churchill, he says, he writes on the bomb, "Never has so much been expected of so few." He was scared. He was worried. This was risky. B for Baker didn't come back. They all died in the crash when they were shot down. The point is, history survives them because of the logs they kept, the illegal diaries they kept, the letters they sent home, the illegal photographs they sent home. Thankfully, they're still alive in our minds. Here's another crew. Interesting. Joe McCarthy, the American I told you about earlier, he's pilot of Q for Queenie. With him are, as I mentioned, Dave Roger, the rear gunner, Don McLean, navigator. He was from Toronto, and Bill Radcliffe from New Westminster. These guys are aboard their aircraft on the same night, ready to go with Q for Queenie, and suddenly Q for Queenie springs a hydraulic leak, flowing out of the engine, and McCarthy knows we're not going anywhere. I'm going to swear here, I hope that's okay on a Sunday. McCarthy says, let's get the spare aircraft that's sitting on the tarmac before some other bastard does. That's how keen they were to fly this op. And so they go to the other aircraft, and here's the route they travel. They go, and I told you again, remember, flying about that ceiling height, all the way there, from RAF Scampton in England, right up there in the top left, across the North Sea, 2 hours to the Ruhr Valley and back. And the navigation is really key. And the navigator, in this case, Don McLean, is offered the option of pairing off some of the excess maps space and using just the narrow corridor that the corridor they're going to be traveling over, dispensing with the messiness and the inconvenience of the excess map. Maclean looks at that and says, I don't like the idea of throwing away a map, especially the latitude. And what he decides is, we're not going to use the rollers and the narrow corridor, we're going to use the full map. And it's a good thing he decided that, because he saved every man on that crew. They're coming back from the Sorpa, and suddenly they realize they're off course. And in order to get back on course, he needs the extra map space. And while they're figuring that out, Joe's doing a circuit, they hear a bang, they're hit from the right side by a shell. McCarthy goes on the intercom, makes sure everybody's ready, it's okay. He gets Don's new coordinates, they fly back across Germany, over Holland, out to the North Sea, and they're doing their approach to Scampton, and Joe realizes as he drops the landing gear, there's no right landing gear. And so he brilliantly brings down that aircraft on one wheel. I don't know how the heck he did it, but he did it. And then you see the last entry here in Maclean's notes. His navigational papers, there are the various entries for the stops, the dam they hit at 12:30. Look at the signature and the date. If that's not the shakiest date I've ever seen on a log in my life, of course he was shaking. He was nervous, he was scared. He said, according to his two sons, he never sat in a navigation position when they left on an operation without saying to himself, I will not survive this day. I will not survive this op. He did 2 full tours, brought his crews home every time. Look at that map of Canada. Remember the hands that flew up in this room, and think about the 20-year-olds who stepped up and became dam busters from every corner of Canada. 30 of them. Bet you they didn't teach you that in high school history class. 30 of them. And here's the elephant in the room, and I want to thank Kathy for pointing this out earlier. The elephant in the room is, how did they get so good? Why were they so proficient as pilots and navigators and flight engineers and bomb aimers? All those ground crews as well. They were trained in Canada in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plant, 231 schools coast to coast. On any given day, there were 10,000 training aircraft like this one in the air, training young men to fly. Winston Churchill called the BCATP the deciding factor in the war. And look at the statistics. Forget all the rest of the stuff there. The most important thing is, of the 133 men who went on that dams raid on the 16th and 17th of May 1943, 56 of them, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, Americans, and Britons, were trained in Canada, right over there. Yes. And here's what they did. They breached the Mona and the Eater and unleashed a torrent of water that took out power stations, factories, killed 1,400 innocent people, mostly forced laborers, but delivered exactly what was needed. Good news. And suddenly there is good news. And the dams raid is proclaiming it in the United States, in Canada, and in Britain. And now Churchill can go before Congress 2 days after the raid and proclaim to his American allies, Britain has turned the corner. And incidentally, to the congressmen and women, it's time for America to ante up. And it worked. The legacy is the film. I've shown you a couple of excerpts. There are the numbers. It was the top grossing film in 1953, 54, 55. But what I want to know is, did they get it right? Here's a very interesting scene in the movie. This scene is when Guy Gibson is consulting his top brass about whom he's going to sign up, whom he's going to recruit to be on the 617 dams raid. Who is it going to be? Did they get it right?
You'll find pretty well everyone that matters in here, sir. On this board or here in these albums. Right, thank you.
Now then. Oh, thanks. I'd go for these 2 Australians if I were you. Les Knight and Mickey Martin. Martin knows pretty well all there is to know about low flying.
Yes, I met him when he was collecting a DFC.
We got the Australians.
I know this New Zealander, Les Munro. I'd like to have him.
Got the New Zealander.
Oh, and Joe McCarthy. He's great.
Oh, the American. The glorious blonde. Used to be a Coney Island beach guard. We mustn't forget the English.
Excuse me? Isn't there a rather large omission there? The 16 Canadians who returned, the 14 who didn't. There aren't too many of these in that movie. Royal Canadian Air Force patches on the shoulders of the actors portraying what Canada did in the Dams raid. So let's remember on the 75th anniversary this brilliant scientist, Barnes Wallis, his wild and woolly dream to have this bouncing bomb knock down the Roar River dams. And let's remember Guy Gibson for his brilliance and his courage and the VC he won for leading the squadron. But we mustn't forget the Canadians. And I thank you.
Thank you, Ted, for that excellent and vivid description of the Dam Busters raid, giving us all a sense of what Canadians achieved in the Second World War. We'll now begin the laying of the wreaths. And to start the program, will the representatives of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum Board of Directors, Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum volunteers, and Veterans Affairs Canada please come forward and lay your wreaths. Will David Sweet, Donna Skelly, Brenda Johnson, and Kathy Puckering please come forward and lay your wreaths? Will the representatives of the Royal Canadian Air Force Women's Division, Royal Canadian Air Force RAF Fighter Command, Royal Canadian Air Force Bomber Command, 424 City of Hamilton Squadron and 8th Wing, and the Canadian Forces Recruiting Center please come forward and lay your wreaths? Will the representatives of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Hamilton Police Service, Hamilton Fire Service, and the Hamilton Fire Service Pensioners Association please come forward and lay your wreaths? the representatives of 447 Wing, Royal Canadian Air Force Association, the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires, and Canada Border Service, please come forward and lay your wreaths. Will the representatives of the Salvation Army, the Korean Veterans Association, Norwegian Veterans, and the Dutch Canadian Veterans Association please come forward and lay your wreaths. Will the representatives of the Redeemer University College, Royal Canadian Air Cadets 779 Squadron, Imperial Order Daughters of the Empire, and the 1st Binbrook Scouts please come forward and lay your wreaths. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as you are able and join us in the singing of verses 1, 5, and 6, O God, our help in ages past. Please be seated. This brings us to another special part of our program today. We're going to take some time now and acknowledge all the veterans who've been able to join us here today. To begin with, would any veterans who survived World War II or the Korean War please stand so we can recognize you? Any veterans of United Nations peacekeeping missions, those who served or are currently serving in NORAD, NATO, and all of those present here who have served in the Canadian Forces, regular or reserve, please stand so we can recognize you. Those men and women who served in Afghanistan, please stand so we can recognize you. And any members of the Royal Air Force Regiment, or those who served with Allied forces, especially under the Crown, please stand so we can recognize you. Thank you all. Now, I invite the Redeemer University College Concert Choir to perform another beautiful song for us, the Song of Triumph.
Great and marvelous, marvelous are your
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I invite you to stand as you are able for the benediction and to remain standing for the royal anthem. O God, we have gathered here this morning to lift our hearts, minds, and voices in memory of those who sacrificed in the wars that have infected this earth of ours. We pray now, O God, that as we leave this place and go forth into the world, that your peace and love will go with each one of us now and forevermore. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. All right, we are incredibly close to being finished. It's time to say a few thank yous. First, I'd like to thank the John C. Munro Hamilton International Airport for providing assistance with parking this year, as with so many others. Thank you to them. Tremendous thanks to the Meadowlands Salvation Army Band on your right, ladies and gentlemen. Since the prelude, they provided lovely music for us today. On your left, the Redeemer University College Choir. Thank you so much for another excellent job. Pipe Major Gordon Black from the Paris Port Dover Pipe Band. He's with us every year. It wouldn't be the same without you. A very special group I would like to thank is the volunteers and staff here at Canadian Warplane Heritage. The amount of work they put in, yes. Yes. They do a tremendous job every year making this possible. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. As I said at the start, this gets bigger every year thanks to all of you. So thank you for being here. After the ceremony finishes, if you're not sure what to do with your poppy, you have a couple of choices here. If you like, you're welcome to come forward and lay your poppy on our cenotaph. There's also a table at the very back. It's the veterans table. It has a display on it like a Canadian flag. It's become a tradition here that we lay our poppies on the table or at the cenotaph as you like. I'd invite you after the recessional, when we march off the colors, I'm going to invite you all to be seated one last time. We have a video that we enjoy playing after the service, and it's called God Bless You, Canada. And I also invite you to stay after the ceremony is over. Obviously, you're free to go on your way, but this is a wonderful opportunity to take in the sights of the museum and talk to the many veterans that are here with us right now. As you saw a few minutes ago, we have just an amazing group of people here, and I invite you all to talk to them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you to stand as you are able for the retiring of the colors. Color party, march off the colors. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated for the video.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, worked for all my life, and I had to start again, just my children and my wife, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. From the shores of Nova Scotia to the forests in BC, Montreal to Winnipeg, from sea to shining sea. From Detroit we can see her above the USA, 'cause there's pride in every Canadian heart, and it's time you stand and say, next
Thank you all for coming. Our cafe to your right is open if you're hungry. Enjoy the rest of your day.